I was getting ready for bed, going through the usual motions, brushing my teeth, switching off the lights, and climbing under the covers. The room was quiet, except for the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, but the silence felt heavier than usual, almost pressing against my ears. I turned onto my side, then my back, then my stomach, but no position felt right. Sleep wouldn't come. My mind felt restless, my chest tight with an anxiety I couldn't explain. Each time I closed my eyes, fragments of forgotten conversations and half-formed images flitted through my thoughts, refusing to settle. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, my thoughts racing in a chaotic blur. The longer I stayed awake, the more the tension built. My pulse thudded in my ears, and I could feel the beads of sweat forming on my temples, despite the coolness of the room. That's when I remembered something I'd heard once. If you picture yourself going down an elevator, it's supposed to help you drift off. I'd never tried it before, but desperation pushed me to give it a shot. I closed my eyes and began imagining the descent, the steady hum of the elevator's motor, the soft vibration of its movements. I pictured the numbers above the doors ticking downward, one by one, a gentle rhythm that seemed to soothe my nerves. At first it felt silly, but then something shifted. The imagined hum grew louder, almost tangible, and the sensation of descending became more vivid. I felt as though the mattress beneath me had disappeared, replaced by cold, hard metal. My breaths grew shallow, and an unsettling weight pressed down on my chest. That's when it all began. The first thing I noticed was the silence. It wasn't the peaceful kind. It was the oppressive kind that made your ears ring, like the world was holding its breath. Even my own footsteps sounded muted, swallowed by the heavy air. The elevator door groaned open, revealing a hallway stretching infinitely in both directions. The tiles underfoot were cracked and stained with something dark and sticky, and the air felt humid, like it had been trapped for centuries. There was a faint smell too, metallic and sour, like rust mixed with decay. I was here to find my brother. He'd been missing for weeks, last seen near this derelict building on the edge of town. People whispered about it. There were stories of it drawing people in, only for them to vanish without a trace. Others said it was a passage to somewhere beyond, a place where you were lost for good. I didn't believe any of it, until now. When I stepped inside earlier, I expected broken furniture and graffiti. What I found instead was that elevator, waiting with its doors wide open, as though it had been expecting me. It felt wrong, like stepping into a trap you already knew was set. The interior was spotless, unnaturally so, with gleaming buttons that seemed freshly polished. There was only one marked floor: subterranean. I stepped into the hallway, and the elevator closed behind me, with a finality that sent a chill down my spine. There was no button to call it back. I tried pounding on the doors anyway, but they didn't so much as rattle. I was alone, or at least I thought I was. The hallway stretched on, each flickering light overhead, barely illuminating the next. As I walked, I felt something behind me, a presence, a pressure. I turned around more than once, convinced I'd see someone or something standing there. But the hallway remained empty, its shadows pooling unnaturally in the corners. The hallway ended at a single wooden door, its surface covered in deep scratches, as if something with claws had tried to get out. The wood seemed to pulse faintly, almost like it was breathing. Above it, carved into the stone, were the words, "Abandon your name, for it holds no power here." I hesitated. My pulse quickened, the words burning themselves into my mind. Names held power. I didn't understand, but I could feel the truth of it, heavy and undeniable. My throat was dry as I reached for the handle, the metal icy against my palm. I pushed the door open, and the air rushed past me, carrying whispers that I couldn't understand. They slithered into my ears and settled in my head, like they were burrowing into my thoughts. What lay beyond was impossible. The first room was a vast, barren desert. The ground was covered in ash, and the sky, if you could call it that, was a swirling mass of dark clouds, glowing faintly red. The air was suffocating, thick with a heat that didn't seem to come from the sun, but from the ground itself. It was dry, yet my skin felt clammy, as though the air was trying to draw the moisture out of me. People wandered aimlessly, their faces blank and their movements sluggish, like puppets with their strings cut. Their clothes hung in tatters, and their bodies were caked in ash, blending almost seamlessly with the landscape. I approached one, a middle-aged man who stood staring at the ground as if waiting for it to speak. His skin was pale beneath the grime, and his eyes were sunken, empty pools. I asked if he'd seen my brother.
"Names don't matter,"
he murmured without looking at me. His voice was raspy, like he hadn't spoken in years. Each word sounded like it was dragged out of him.
"You'll forget his. You'll forget yours."
"What do you mean?" I demanded, stepping closer. He finally looked up, and I wished he hadn't. His eyes weren't just empty. They were hollow, black voids that seemed to pull at my thoughts, as if trying to erase them. Before I could press him further, a deafening wind picked up, carrying the ash in violent gusts. The man staggered away, vanishing into the storm like a mirage torn apart. The wind howled like it was alive, and the ash burned as it scraped against my skin. I shielded my face, squinting through the chaos, and saw a faint light in the distance. It flickered like a dying ember, but it was my only guide. Each step was a struggle. The ash-coated ground shifted beneath my feet, and the storm seemed intent on pushing me back. Shadows moved at the edges of my vision, vague, twisting forms that melted into the haze before I could focus on them. I'd almost convinced myself they were tricks of the light, until I heard a whisper right next to my ear. A voice so cold it made my spine stiffen. I spun around, but no one was there. The shadows grew darker, closing in, and the whispering multiplied, overlapping until it became a cacophony. I forced myself forward, each step heavier than the last. By the time I reached the light, my legs felt like lead, and my lungs burned with every breath. The light came from another door, its surface metallic and icy to the touch. Despite the heat of the desert, frost clung to it, forming intricate patterns that dissolved at my touch. As I opened the door, the wind stopped abruptly, and the storm fell silent behind me. What lay beyond was colder and darker than I could have imagined. The next room was a labyrinth of mirrors. At first I thought I was alone, but then I saw them, reflections that weren't mine. They didn't move as I did. Instead, they stood still, watching, their faces twisted into expressions of mockery, and disdain. Some whispered, their mouths moving soundlessly at first, but soon the voices began to filter through the air, overlapping in a dissonant chorus. They weren't just voices, they were accusations.
You're weak.
One said, its tone dripping with venom.
A coward.
Another added, its words slicing through the growing din. They didn't just whisper my brother's name. They called out events I thought I'd buried. Moments of failure, regret, shame. They called me a liar, a failure, dragging pieces of my past into the light, twisting them into accusations that made my stomach churn. I tried to block it out, but the maze offered no escape. Every turn brought more mirrors, more reflections, and the voices followed me, hissing and taunting, louder with every step.
You'll join us soon.
One reflection sneered, its face morphing into something grotesque. The glass rippled like water, and I froze as the reflection reached out, its hand pressing against the surface from the other side. The sound of cracking glass echoed through the room, sharp and jarring. I stumbled back, but there was nowhere to go. Behind me, another reflection laughed, the sound hollow and cruel. Desperation boiled in my chest. I grabbed a loose shard of mirror from the floor, its edges biting into my skin, and swung it at the nearest reflection. The glass shattered into a million splinters, and for a brief moment the whispers stopped. The silence was deafening, and I stood there panting, blood dripping from my knuckles where the shard had cut deep. But the relief was short-lived. The fragments on the ground began to stir, trembling as though alive, and I heard the voices again, faint at first, but rising steadily.
Why did you hurt them? Insane.
A bone-chilling harmony that filled the space. Panic clawed at me, and I scanned the maze for an exit. My eyes locked onto another door in the distance, its surface carved from bone, the material almost glowing against the oppressive darkness. I ran for it, my reflections, faces, still etched into the glass around me, their eyes tracking my every move. The whispers followed, growing louder as I reached the door. My hand trembled as I grasped the bone handle, feeling the cold seep into my skin. Behind me, the reflections moved closer, their faces pressing against the glass, distorted and grotesque. With a final burst of strength, I yanked the door open and stumbled through, slamming it shut behind me. The voices stopped abruptly, replaced by a deep, suffocating silence. My heart pounded in my chest, and my blooded knuckles throbbed, but I had no time to dwell on it. Whatever lay beyond this door was waiting, and I knew it wouldn't be any kinder than the maze I'd just escaped. The third room was a swamp, its waters thick and black, bubbling like tar. The air was heavy with the stench of rot, a cloying mix of decay and stagnant water that made my eyes water. A narrow path of rotting wood led through it, creaking ominously under each step. The sound of dripping water echoed through the oppressive silence, but it wasn't the only noise. Somewhere in the distance, faint splashes and guttural croaks created an unsettling symphony. The water wasn't still. I could see shapes moving beneath its surface, rippling shadows that twisted and writhed. They weren't just shadows. They were human shapes, or what was left of them. Skeletal hands reached up, their nails clawing at the air, desperate and frantic. Faces, half decayed, their features barely recognizable as human, broke the surface, mouths gaping in silent screams. Each movement sent ripples through the black water. and I had to force myself to keep moving. The wood beneath me groaned, the planks sinking slightly with every step, and I froze when I felt something brush against my leg. It was cold and slimy, and I recoiled instinctively, but the contact didn't stop. One of the shapes surged upward, its skeletal hand latching onto my ankle with a grip that felt impossibly strong. Its face rose from the muck, what was left of it, grotesque and twisted. The skin stretched taut over its skull. Its mouth opened, impossibly wide, releasing a sound that didn't belong in this world. It was like nails on glass, shrieking and piercing, and it echoed through the swamp, stirring the waters around me. I kicked at it, panic surging through my veins, but its grip only tightened. I stumbled backward, my foot plunging into the muck, and the stench overwhelmed me. It was unbearable, a sickening blend of sulfur and rot that made me gag. The creature's other hand reached for me, its bony fingers clawing at my leg. Desperation took over, and I lashed out with all the strength I had left, finally dislodging its grip. It fell back into the water with a splash, but I didn't wait to see if it would rise again. I clawed my way forward, the muck sucking at my shoes, trying to pull me back. The path was slick and unstable, the planks bowing dangerously under my weight. Shadows loomed at the edges of my vision, more shapes stirring beneath the surface. I moved faster, my breath coming in ragged gasps, my heart hammering in my chest. The splashes grew louder behind me, and I didn't dare look back. When I finally reached solid ground, I collapsed, my hands trembling, and my legs burning from the effort. The swamp seemed to breathe, its waters rippling as though alive. In the distance, faint voices echoed, disembodied murmurs that sent chills down my spine. Whispers of words I couldn't quite make out, but they carried a weight that pressed on my chest, urging me to leave while I still could. Ahead of me loomed the next door, its surface etched with symbols that seemed to writhe and twist when I looked at them, like they were alive. The faint glow emanating from the carvings was cold and sickly, casting strange shadows on the ground. I forced myself to stand, wiping the muck from my hands as best I could, and approached the door. My body protested with every step, but I couldn't stay here. Whatever lay beyond, it had to be better than this, didn't it? The fourth room was colder than anything I'd ever experienced. The ground was ice, a glassy, unforgiving surface that reflected faint, distorted images of the room above. Beneath it, bodies were frozen in twisted poses, their faces locked in expressions of agony. Their hands were outstretched, as if reaching for help that never came. Some were pressed so close to the surface that their icy eyes seemed to follow me as I moved, their frozen gazes a silent plea that gnawed at my nerves. Each step sent a sharp, echoing crack through the still air, as if the ice could give way at any moment. The air was so frigid that every breath felt like shards of glass slicing my lungs. My skin burned with the cold, my hands trembling as I clutched my arms to my chest. Frost clung to my eyelashes, making my vision blur as I scanned the room. Even my movements felt sluggish, as if the cold had seeped into my very bones, dragging me down with each passing second. At the room's center stood a figure cloaked in black, shrouded in a fabric that seemed to absorb all light. It held a lantern that emitted no glow, only an oppressive darkness that seemed to radiate outward, swallowing the faint reflections around it.
Why are you here?
It asked, its voice a guttural echo that reverberated through the room. It didn't speak loudly, yet the sound filled the space, pressing down on me like a weight. The words felt like they were burrowing into my skull, demanding an answer I wasn't prepared to give. "I'm looking for my brother," I said, my words trembling as much from fear as from the cold. My voice sounded small, swallowed by the vast, icy expanse. Each word left my lips like a fragile thread, only to be devoured by the oppressive silence that followed. The figure tilted its head, the motion slow and deliberate, like it was studying me.
Few who come here leave.
Its words seemed to linger in the air, curling around me like smoke, thick and suffocating. I wanted to speak, to demand answers, but my tongue felt heavy, and the figure's presence made every thought sluggish. The lantern in its hand flickered, the darkness within it pulsing like a heartbeat. Shadows danced wildly around the room, stretching and contorting as though alive. Then, without warning, the lantern flared to life, a blinding, unnatural light that cut through the gloom like a blade. It wasn't warm. It felt like the light itself carried the same biting cold, slicing through me as surely as the icy air. The ice beneath my feet groaned, the sound deep and resonant like the growl of some ancient beast. Cracks spider-webbed outward, thin fissures at first, but they grew rapidly, splintering beneath me. The figures frozen in the ice seemed to shift, their hands inching closer to the surface, their mouths opening wider in silent screams. Panic surged through me as I tried to move, but the ground gave way, and I plunged into the darkness below. The light of the lantern faded into nothing above me, swallowed by the encroaching blackness. The cold embraced me like a living thing, dragging me deeper. And for a moment, I felt as though I were becoming one of the frozen forms, sinking into the unyielding ice forever. I landed in the final room. It wasn't a room at all, but a vast cavern illuminated by a sickly green light that pulsed faintly, as though alive. The walls soared high, lined with thousands of doors, each one identical, emitting a faint, hollow sound that resonated in the cavern's eerie stillness. The air was thick with a metallic tang, and an unnatural chill crept over my skin. A voice echoed through the chamber, low and thunderous, vibrating in my chest.
Choose.
The word reverberated, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. I looked around, desperate for any clue, but the cavern offered no answers. The voice repeated, louder this time.
Choose.
My heart pounded as I approached one of the doors at random. Its surface was smooth and cold, the handle carved into a grotesque shape that seemed to shift under my touch. I hesitated, but the oppressive weight of the voice compelled me forward. I turned the handle and opened the door. What I saw on the other side made my blood run cold. It was my brother, sitting at our kitchen table, the faint glow of an overhead light casting harsh shadows across his face. His expression was blank, his eyes empty, staring at nothing. But he wasn't alone. There was something with him. It sat across from him, its face identical to mine, but the smile it wore was wrong, too wide, its teeth sharp and gleaming. The thing wearing my face turned to look at me, its eyes glinting with malice, and I felt my stomach churn. The door slammed shut with a force that sent me stumbling backward. The voice laughed, deep and guttural, shaking the cavern like an earthquake.
You cannot leave. Not yet.
The laughter echoed, growing fainter, but no less chilling, as the cavern began to shift. One by one, the doors started to open, their hinges creaking like ancient bones. Through each door, horrors spilled forth. Visions of twisted, impossible creatures, writhing shadows, and scenes of torment that defied comprehension. Screams filled the air, a cacophony of agony and despair that set my teeth on edge. I ran, though I knew there was nowhere to go. The cavern stretched on forever, a maze of unending torment. The ground beneath my feet shifted and cracked, forcing me to stumble and claw my way forward. The doors continued to open, each one revealing something worse than the last. A gaunt, eyeless figure reaching out with elongated fingers, a mass of writhing limbs fused together in a grotesque dance. A room filled with the sound of sobbing, but no source in sight. My breath came in ragged gasps, my legs trembling with exhaustion, but I couldn't stop. The voice pursued me, its laughter rolling like thunder.
Choose wisely, for every door brings you closer to the truth, or further from it.
A cold sweat slicked my skin as I glanced over my shoulder. The horrors spilling from the doors gaining on me. My mind raced, frantically searching for meaning, for a way out. The whispers from the doors grew louder, each one calling, tempting me to open them, to see what lay beyond. But I couldn't. I wouldn't. My brother was here somewhere, and I had to find him before the cavern's horrors swallowed me whole. I don't know how long I've been here. Days. Years. Time doesn't mean anything anymore. The cavern has become my prison, its oppressive vastness both infinite and suffocating. The doors still call to me, their whispers threading through the silence like invasive tendrils, wrapping around my mind. They murmur my name, taunting and coaxing, showing me fragments of things I'd rather forget. Memories twisted into grotesque caricatures, moments of shame and guilt, amplified until they feel like they're etched into my very being. My brother is here somewhere, I'm sure of it. I catch glimpses of him in the fleeting shadows, hear his voice among the cacophony, a faint, desperate cry that seems to drift just out of reach. I've opened so many doors, each one stealing a piece of me. The faces I see behind the doors, my own, distorted and laughing, linger in my mind long after the door slams shut. With every step, every agonizing moment, I feel the weight of this place pressing down on me. I'm unraveling, my sense of self slipping through my fingers like sand. The thought gnaws at me, a relentless whisper of doubt. If I ever find him, will there be enough of me left to save him? Or will I be just another reflection, trapped in this unending nightmare?